Okay, so you want to own a stadium. Picture it, 80,000 people on their feet, screaming your team's name, and every single one of them just paid you for a ticket, a beer, and a parking spot. You own the building where history happens, championships, concerts, sold-out crowds chanting because of something you built. That's the dream. Here's what actually happens. Let's start with the price of admission because it is not what you think. You don't just buy a stadium the way you buy a house. Most of the time, you're either buying a team that comes with a stadium attached, or you're financing the construction of a brand new one from scratch. And the second option is where the real numbers get insane. SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, home of the Rams and the Chargers, cost around $5 billion to build. $5 billion. That's not a typo. Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, home of the Raiders, came in around $2 billion.
Even a modest new arena for an NBA or NHL team is going to run you somewhere between $600 million and $1.5 billion, depending on the market. And if you're thinking soccer instead of American football, Tottenham Hotspur's new stadium in London cost roughly $1.5 billion, and it took years longer than planned to finish. This is not a hobby purchase. This is the kind of number where you need banks, taxpayers, and sometimes entire city governments to say yes before you pour a single foot of concrete. And here's the twist nobody explains up front. You, the owner, rarely pay for all of it yourself. Cities love giving stadium subsidies. Public financing, tax breaks, infrastructure deals, free land. It's incredibly common for 40, 50, sometimes 70% of a stadium's cost to be covered by public money, because mayors want to be the person who brought the team downtown or kept the team from leaving.
Sounds like a great deal for the owner, right? It is, but it also means your stadium's economics are tangled up in local politics from day one, and that never stays simple. Every subsidy comes with strings, job promises, community benefit agreements, sometimes even revenue-sharing clauses that quietly eat into your upside for decades. So let's say you've got your site, your financing, your blueprints. Now what? Now you find out that the sticker price everyone talks about, the $2 billion, the $5 billion, is just the beginning. Because before a single ticket is ever sold, the bills are already piling up, and they keep piling up for years. Here's the trap almost nobody sees coming: construction interest. If you're borrowing $1 billion to build a stadium, you are paying interest on that loan the entire time it's being built. And stadiums take 3, 4, sometimes 5 years to complete. That's 5 years of interest payments before a single fan walks through the gate.
Then there's cost overruns, and in this industry, overruns are basically guaranteed. The Golden One Center in Sacramento went over its original budget. SoFi Stadium's budget nearly doubled from the original estimate of $2.6 billion to that final $5 billion number, largely because of pandemic-related delays and material cost spikes. Add in delays from permitting, from environmental reviews, from labor shortages, from literal global pandemics shutting down supply chains, and by the time you're ready to open the doors, you've already spent years bleeding money on interest, overruns, and depreciation on a building that hasn't hosted a single event. Some ownership groups even end up refinancing mid-construction because the original loan terms no longer make sense once the timeline slips 2 or 3 years past schedule. And once it's open, the bleeding doesn't stop. A modern stadium needs an army just to keep the lights on. We're talking about a full-time staff for maintenance, security, grounds crew, ticketing systems, IT infrastructure for those massive video boards, some of which cost tens of millions of dollars on their own, and HVAC systems the size of small buildings. You need groundskeepers who can flip a football field into a soccer pitch into a concert stage within 48 hours. You need cybersecurity teams to protect ticketing and payment systems from fraud. Just the operating costs of a major stadium can run tens of millions of dollars a year before you've made a single dollar back. And every few years, there's a refresh cost too. New scoreboards, new seating, new technology, because fans compare your stadium to whatever opened last year in another city, and falling behind on amenities directly hurts suite sales and sponsorship renewals. Now, everyone stops the story here at the scary construction numbers, because that's the easy, viral part. We're not going to stop there. Because the real story, the part that separates a stadium that makes its owner insanely rich from one that becomes a financial black hole, is what happens after opening day. And that's exactly the kind of thing this channel exists to dig into. Not the headline number everyone repeats, but the mechanics underneath it that nobody bothers to explain. So if you want to actually understand how money moves in industries like this, before the next flashy headline tricks you into thinking you understand it, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because the next part is where this whole business either becomes a gold mine or a disaster, and almost nobody outside the industry knows which signs to look for. So how does a stadium actually make money? Let's talk about the obvious source first, tickets. Yes, ticket sales matter, but here's the thing that surprises people. Tickets are actually one of the least profitable parts of the business, relatively speaking.
Ticket revenue is capped by how many seats you have and how many games or events you can realistically host in a year. An NFL team only plays 8 or 9 home games a season. Even with concerts and other events filling the calendar, there's a hard ceiling on how many times you can sell out that building in 365 days. Ticket prices are also politically sensitive. Jack them up too high, too fast, and you get bad press, empty seats, and angry fan bases who start calling you greedy on local radio. So tickets are steady, predictable, and important for cash flow, but they're not where the real money lives. The real money, the part that's far less regulated, far more flexible, and honestly, far more lucrative, is everything else happening inside that building. Luxury suites are the single biggest one. A single luxury suite at a major stadium can lease for anywhere from $100,000 to over $1 million a year, and a big stadium might have over 100 of these, sold on multi-year contracts to corporations who want to entertain clients. Do that math. That's potentially tens of millions of dollars a year just from a few dozen private boxes, locked in years in advance, regardless of whether the team wins or loses. Then there's naming rights. SoFi paid an estimated $600 million over 20 years just to put its name on that Los Angeles stadium. Allegiant paid around $25 million a year for its naming rights deal in Vegas. Crypto.com paid $700 million over 20 years for the naming rights to the arena in Los Angeles that used to be called Staples Center. That's pure profit dropping straight into the owner's pocket. No fans required, no tickets sold. Just a logo on a building, negotiated once and collected for 2 decades. And then there's concessions, parking, sponsorship signage, non-sporting events like concerts and conventions, and increasingly, real estate development around the stadium itself. Modern stadiums are being built as part of massive mixed-use developments, hotels, retail, apartments, entertainment districts, all owned by the same group that owns the stadium. SoFi Stadium isn't just a stadium anymore. It's the anchor of an entire entertainment complex called Hollywood Park, with office space, retail, and housing all generating rent for the ownership group, completely separate from anything that happens on game day.
That's the less obvious income stream. You're not just running a stadium, you're running a small city, and every business inside that city pays you rent, whether the home team wins the championship or misses the playoffs entirely. Concessions alone deserve a mention here too, because most fans assume the team or the concession company keeps that money. But stadium owners typically take a cut of every hot dog, every beer, every jersey sold inside the building through concession and merchandising agreements. Parking is similar. A stadium with 10,000 parking spots charging $40 or $50 a car for a sold-out game is quietly pulling in $500,000 before anyone's even walked through the gate. Let's talk about what happens when this goes wrong, because it absolutely can go catastrophically wrong. The most infamous cautionary tale in modern stadium history is the Pontiac Silverdome in Michigan.
Built in the 1970s for around $55 million, it once hosted a Super Bowl and a WrestleMania with over 90,000 fans in attendance. By 2009, after the Detroit Lions left for a new stadium downtown, the Silverdome was sold at auction for $583,000. Let that sink in. A building that cost $55 million, adjusted for inflation, worth well over $200 million in today's money, sold for less than the price of a nice house. It sat abandoned, got vandalized, flooded when the roof failed under snow load, and was eventually demolished for scrap. That's the nightmare scenario. A stadium loses its anchor tenant, has no other revenue plan, and becomes a money pit that costs more to maintain than it earns, until nobody wants it at any price. Another brutal example, the Silverdome isn't alone. The Georgia Dome was demolished after just 25 years of use, imploded to make way for a newer stadium next door. Because in this industry, newer and shinier beats still structurally fine every single time. Owners and cities would rather blow up a perfectly functional multi-hundred-million-dollar building than keep operating something that isn't generating maximum revenue anymore. That tells you everything about how this business really works. It's not about the building, it's about the cash flow the building can generate. And the moment that cash flow dries up, the asset becomes a liability fast, sitting there costing money in property taxes, security, and basic upkeep with zero events booked. Now let's look at the success story, because when this model works, it works spectacularly. A TNT Stadium in Arlington, Texas, home of the Dallas Cowboys, is often cited as one of the most profitable stadiums on the planet. The Cowboys, largely because of that stadium's revenue engine, luxury suites, sponsorships, hosting everything from college football championships to concerts to even a papal mass, have been valued as one of the most valuable sports franchises in the world, with Forbes placing their overall franchise value north of $9 billion in recent years. Jerry Jones didn't just build a football stadium. He built a revenue machine that operates 365 days a year, whether the Cowboys are playing or not. Concerts, corporate events, high school football championships, monster truck shows. The building is almost never sitting empty. And every single event brings in facility fees, concessions, and parking revenue on top of whatever the primary event organizer pays to rent the space. The stadium even runs guided tours for tourists who just want to see the building, generating revenue on days with zero events scheduled at all. So what actually separates a Pontiac Silverdome disaster from an AT&T Stadium gold mine? A few things, and they're worth understanding clearly. First, does the stadium have an anchor tenant with a long-term lease, or is it dependent on one team that could leave in 10 or 15 years? Buildings built around a single sports team with no exit plan and no secondary use are fragile. Second, location. A stadium in a major metro area with a dense population and strong corporate presence nearby, like Dallas or Los Angeles, has a built-in customer base for suites and sponsorships that a smaller market simply doesn't have. A stadium in a smaller market has a much smaller pool of companies willing to pay $1 million a year for a suite, which means suite revenue in a small market can be a fraction of what an identical building earns in a major one.
Third, multi-use design. Stadiums built only for one sport with no ability to host concerts, conventions, or other events are far more vulnerable than multi-purpose venues that can fill their calendar year-round. And fourth, maybe the most underrated factor. Who's actually managing the real estate around it? The stadiums making the most money today aren't just stadiums anymore, they're entertainment districts, and the ownership groups smart enough to develop hotels, retail, and apartments around their venue are capturing revenue streams that a standalone stadium simply can't touch, effectively turning a single-purpose building into a diversified real estate portfolio. So where is this industry heading? The trend right now is unmistakable. Stadiums are becoming less like buildings and more like real estate empires. Look at what's happening around SoFi Stadium, around the new venues in Vegas, even the plans for future Olympic and World Cup venues.
Nobody's just building a bowl of seats anymore. They're building hotels, office towers, retail corridors, and residential units, all wrapped around the stadium, all owned by the same entity, so that even on a day with no game, the property is generating rent. Cities are also getting more skeptical about handing out massive public subsidies after decades of economic studies showing that stadiums rarely deliver the local economic boost that politicians promise voters. Some research has found the jobs and tax revenue generated don't come close to covering what taxpayers put in. That means future stadium deals may require owners to put up more of their own capital, which raises the stakes even further and makes the real estate side of the business even more important as a way to offset the risk. And there's also a growing trend of stadiums being financed and even partially owned by outside investment groups and private equity, treating these buildings less like passion projects for billionaires and more like alternative real estate assets in a diversified portfolio, the same way someone might hold office towers or shopping malls. So let's land the plane. What does actually owning a stadium look like financially in the real world? There are two honest scenarios. The optimistic one: you're in a major market, you've got a stable, successful anchor tenant locked into a long-term lease, you've built in retail and hotel development around the site, your naming rights and sponsorship deals are worth hundreds of millions over a couple of decades, and your suites alone are pulling in $50 to $100 million a year before a single hot dog is sold. In that world, a stadium is one of the best cash-generating assets in professional sports, quietly worth billions, appreciating right alongside the team it houses, and generating revenue on days when there isn't even a game being played. The realistic scenario, the one that actually applies to most stadium projects around the world: you built or bought into a facility that cost anywhere from $600 million to $2 billion. You're carrying that debt for decades. Your anchor tenant has options to leave in 10 to 15 years. Your city subsidized part of the build, but is now under public pressure not to do it again. And your annual profit margin depends entirely on filling a calendar with enough non-sporting events to justify the overhead.
In that world, you're not swimming in cash. You're managing a massive, expensive, cash flow sensitive asset that can turn from a golden goose into a silver dome the moment your anchor tenant walks out the door, and where every renovation decision, every naming rights renewal, and every subsidy negotiation determines whether you're the next AT&T Stadium or the next abandoned dome rusting on the edge of town. Because here's the truth underneath all of it. You are not buying a stadium. You are buying a bet on a city, a bet on a team staying loyal for 30 years, and a bet on your own ability to turn a concrete bowl into a year-round revenue machine before someone else builds a shinier one next door.